Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Welcome to another episode of the Marketing You Practice podcast, the podcast where I get to simplify the marketing and the mindset so you, the chiropractor, can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. In today's episode, I want to share with you 4 questions that may very well change your life. They've absolutely changed my life for the better, too. I was introduced first to them by a great friend of mine and mentor, Dr Russ Rosen. These questions, Russ didn't invent them, but he is a master at sharing them, come from Byron Katie's book called Loving What Is. Now, before I get into these questions, I want to tell you a story. A few weeks ago, my gorgeous wife and I and Sonny were over in Adelaide. We had a week over there and we were going over there to visit Edison, my eldest boy, middle child, they're 2. And there were 2 parts to this trip. The first part was going to be with some other family members. So my mum, my dad, and my sister. So we needed a bigger place for that. The second part of the trip was going to be just the 3 of us. So we could have a smaller place too. Now, Lauren was in charge of accommodation. She does a great job with these things and likes to work her way through Airbnb. And for the first half of the trip, she'd organised this beautiful almost like penthouse apartment, Glenelg, right on the beach. We're up on the 8th floor. We got to see the sunset every night, and it was just, she knocked it out of the park. Now, I wasn't sure what she'd organised for the second part of the trip, and I didn't really ask her at all, but she talked about getting us kind of into the city, perhaps getting a place with a swimming pool. I had some work to do the second part of the trip, and so she wanted somewhere where her and Sonny would be able to kind of fill their time. Now, it got to the changeover was going to be on the Sunday evening, and it got to Saturday afternoon, and I said to Lauren, "Where have you booked and where are we going tomorrow?" She says, "I haven't booked anything." Now, this surprised the heck out of me, and this is where things turned a little bit pear-shaped for me. In fact, this, around about the time that Lauren said I hadn't booked anything, was when I immediately became the toddler in the house. I got frustrated, I got a little bit kind of sulky, and I started to look for places. So I was jumping on Airbnb to try and find a place and was having no luck at all. Now, to make it a little bit more tricky as well, we needed a place where I could get an early check-in because Sonny likes to have a sleep around 11 o'clock in the morning. He has a big 2-hour sleep then. And we are pretty regimented with his sleep routine because it makes life easier for all of us. And I couldn't get a place where I could check in at 11 o'clock, like anywhere. I don't know what was going on in Adelaide that weekend, but it was impossible. So we reached out to the apartment that we were staying in and we said to them, "Hey, listen, we would like to stay on in this place. Is there any chance that you could do a discount rate?" In fact, the reason we asked them for a discount rate is eventually I did find another place in the apartment block there as well. So instead of it being a 3-bedroom place, we found a 2-bedroom place. And we said, "Look, we would rather stay in your place, but I can get another place in the apartment block here that was virtually half the price." And so as much as I wanted to stay in this lovely apartment for half the price, I was happy to go down a couple of floors. But I was still stuck with I couldn't get into this place until after midday. Now, the gentleman who owned the place reached back out to us and said, "No, the price is the price." And I was surprised because I knew that his place was empty for the next few days. I thought he would rather take at least, and I didn't need him to half the price, but if he'd get close and at least match it was what I was after there too. So I got cranky that he wasn't seeing things my way. I was cranky at Lauren because she hadn't organised any accommodation. And so I spent the rest of the afternoon, probably 2 or 3 hours, trying to come up with options. Now, interesting, while this was happening, while I was behaving like a child, Lauren was really calm and relaxed. Now, later on in the afternoon, she went and checked her phone and she found a message from the owner of the place that we're in. And he had sent her a message outside of the Airbnb platform saying, "Of course you can stay in my place, but rather than running it through the Airbnb platform because I have to pay a bunch of commissions to them as well, here's my bank account details, put it directly in that." Now, some interesting things happened from this. Everything turned out perfectly. I'd spent a whole afternoon huffing and puffing and fussing when I didn't need to at all. It was an enjoyable afternoon for me. I wasn't enjoyable to be around, and all of that for nothing. Now, I wonder, have you ever had circumstances like that where you have stressed yourself for no reason and everything worked out fine? And sometimes I will stress myself for no reason and things don't work out fine. But instead of just smiling and whistling my way through it, I decide that I kind of huff and puff. Now, I was thinking about this afterwards, about my behavior that I wasn't all that proud of. And I was reminded of Byron Katie's work and the 4 questions. Now, Byron Katie says this. She says, all suffering comes from arguing with reality. I think about that statement all the time. It's one I share with my coaching clients all the time also. The work is incredibly powerful to do when you have shoulds. And I'm going to work my way through the work with you with this scenario that I had with Lauren. And I'm going to share a conversation that I had with a coaching client in around some of the difficulties that they were having with patients following through with care. And then I'll give you some examples of where you might like to do the work, okay? So there are 4 questions that we do the work with. And before we can do the work, we need to come up with a statement that's frustrating. And the statement for me was really simple. Lauren should have booked the accommodation. That was it. That's what was causing my frustrations. Lauren should have booked the accommodation and she didn't. Now, because of that, I was feeling frustrated. I was feeling angry. I was feeling disappointed. I was feeling all of those type of things. Now, the first question that Byron asks, or Katie asks, it's interesting because sometimes she refers to herself as Byron and Katie. In fact, I think Katie is her first name. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. So the first of the 4 questions is it true? Now, when you're asking yourself these questions, it's important that you take some time to be still and really honest with yourself. And the answer to the first 2 questions is a one-word answer. It's either yes or no. It's not yes and then a whole story that goes along with it. So the question is it true that Lauren should have booked the accommodation? Now, I might be tempted in this situation. There are some times here when I say yes. But when I answered this question here, I went, no. I could have booked the accommodation. I didn't check in with her that she booked the second part of the accommodation. I knew that she was having some difficulties deciding with what places that she was going to book. So I just assumed that she should have booked it. If when you're asking this question that you're tempted to say yes at this stage, and it's totally okay that you do, we move to the second question, which is, can I absolutely know it's true? And again, sit and be still. So I was tempted in this scenario here to say, look, I had an agreement with Lauren. Lauren said that she was going to book all of the accommodation. And so therefore, should she have booked the accommodation there? Is it true? I'm like, yes, that was the agreement. And then I move on to that second question where I can just dive a little bit deeper. And can I absolutely know it's true? In order for you to get the most from these 4 questions, then, as I mentioned before, being still and honest with yourself and watching to see what answers come up. And maybe not what answers come up immediately. You might have to spend a few moments with this. But in every situation when I have something should happen, while that first question I might want to say, yes, it should happen. When I get into the second part and I say, can I absolutely know that it's true? Often in this scenario here, I'm able to reflect back and go, I can't with 100% confidence know that this is the way that the universe should have turned out. Now, I said to you before that Byron Katie says that all of life's struggles, all of life's pains come from arguing with reality. She would go on to say, I know that it's not true that Lauren should have booked the accommodation because she didn't book it. That's how I know that it's true. And believing otherwise is what's causing you the difficulty inside of here. The third question we go on to, we can continue to explore a little further, and we move beyond just our one-word answers here. The third question is, how do you react and what happens when you believe the thought? Now, when I believed the thought that Lauren should have booked the accommodation, and she didn't, as I explained to you before, I got petulant and childish and immature. I got grumpy. I went over and sat on the couch and kind of isolated myself from everybody else. I didn't enjoy the beautiful surroundings. I wasn't, there's a great game of football that was on. I wasn't looking at the sunset. I wasn't interacting, enjoying the conversations. Now, the interesting thing is this. I could have been doing all of those things whilst also looking for accommodation. Often the same actions happen, but who am I when I'm doing the actions there? So in essence, how do I act and what happens? Well, I behaved like a child. That's what I did, and I do when I get into these kind of scenarios. The fourth question is, who would you be without this thought? So who would I be without the thought that Lauren should have booked the accommodation? I would have been free to have booked the accommodation, to have taken responsibility that afternoon. I would have been free to do it in a joyful way. We could have laughed about it. I could have enjoyed the beautiful view. I could have gone and sat out into the balcony, poured myself a glass of wine and just flicked through my iPad and found accommodation. I could have been trusting that it will all work out in the end. One of my mantras that I like to go to in difficult situations like this is everything is figure outable. But I didn't go there because I had a should. Now, when I look at this scenario in terms of who could I be, it gives me another option. Now, this one here I did in retrospect. I'd kind of calmed down about it, but I try to ask myself these questions whenever I'm feeling frustrated, whenever I'm feeling angry, whenever I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I feel disappointed that something should be going away and it's not. I ask myself these questions. And very, very often, the change is significant for me. Now, it doesn't change the outcome in many cases, but it does change the journey that I'm able to take along the way. Now, how might this relate to you in practice? Well, in a coaching consultation I was having recently, the chiropractor I was chatting with was really frustrated because she was having this sense that patients just weren't getting chiropractic care. They weren't following through with their chiropractic care. They weren't getting the big idea. Now, this is a frustration that I've had many times. And it was this frustration in the early days that Russ really helped me out with. And the distinctions that he gave me brought me a tremendous amount of enjoyment back in practice there too. It took a leash off my neck, so to speak, there too. And not only did it increase the enjoyment that I had in practice, it really skyrocketed the results I had. It helped me with my retention, it helped me better connect with patients, it helped my practice profitability. So don't think for one moment that these 4 questions here are all airy-fairy and won't make a difference to the bottom line in practice, because they absolutely will. So let's look at that question again of that patients should follow through with care. Now, before we get into the 4 questions, I asked the chiropractor, how do you feel when you think the thought that patients should follow through with care and they don't? And she shared with me, I feel frustrated. She said, I get really judgmental, and she gets judgmental on herself, that I'm not doing a great job, that I'm not doing chiropractic the service that it should be. And then she gets really judgmental on the patients too. Like, how can they not understand this? Are they stupid as well? She went on to tell me that at times that she feels defeated, that just overwhelmed with what's the point of all of this anyway? And I said, when you feel frustrated and judgmental and disappointed in yourself and in others and defeated, what do? She says, I end up doing one of 2 things. I spend all my time working way too hard trying to convince patients to continue with their care, or she says I become apathetic and I just can't be bothered. Like I just don't do anything and I just let them do whatever they want to do. Now, the results of this, if you have a think about it for a moment, that when we're trying to convince anybody to do anything long term, when we're trying to push somebody into it, that's not the best form of behavior change. It might work in the short term. And often, if you in your practice have really great conversion into people starting care, but they don't follow through, then maybe you're really good at convincing them to start. But if they're not self-generating their own interest in their own behaviors, people often don't follow through. This happens with a lot of chiropractors because we force and convince people into care as opposed to giving them agency into making their own decisions. So the end result of, thinking the thought that patients should follow through with care and they don't is frustration, judgment, disappointment in self and feeling defeated, end up either trying to convince them too much or doing nothing at all. And the result is patients don't follow through with care. This is often referred to as the self-fulfilling prophecy, okay? So let's run this through the 4 questions and let's ask the question, is it true that patients should follow through with care? Now, you might be tempted at this stage to say, yes, they should. It's the best for their health. It'll make a difference to their symptoms. It'll make a difference to their overall expression of life, all those type of things there too. So you might be tempted, and I can understand and I would support you if you said, yes, it's true. But we get to the next question, which is, can I absolutely know it's true? Do you know that right now that this is the time for this person to follow through with their care? Can you absolutely know that? Now, when I ask myself that question, for me, the answer is I have to say no. I know for me that there have been circumstances in my life where it's taken me multiple tries and I've had to go through failure after failure after failure before I've eventually learnt it. I've told you times in the past that I've had to learn that with my savings, with my tax planning, all those type of things. And had I not had those failures in the past, I wouldn't have learned and had the strengths that I have now. I am a believer that struggling is what leads to strength and that failure is what leads to learning. And so when I ask myself, can I absolutely know for true that this time round is the time that patients should follow through with care? Is it possible that there are other things going on in their life that might even be more important than their health right now? The idea that health is the most important thing, that's a value that I have. Not everybody has that, okay? And maybe they don't need it at the moment also. I had a time last year where I had a tooth that cracked, and I went into the dentist, and the dentist said, well, we need to not only just patch this tooth, but we need to kind of rebuild it. And he said that's going to take a number of months for us to do and a lot of time over this next few weeks. Now, I didn't have the time at that moment. I was working on some projects and I couldn't be going into the dentist multiple times a week. And so I said to him, what I need to have happen right now is I need a patch-up job. I need this tooth not to fall apart. And then in about 2 months' time, I'll come back and get it fixed. Now, that wasn't just an excuse. That was what was important for me in that moment. So we had to do a patch-up. Now, if in that time that dentist was thinking, this guy should really care about his health, well, yes, but I had something more important than my health in that moment. That was what was my situation there too. So the next question is, can I absolutely know that it's true that patients should follow through with care? Many of you, when you ask yourself this question and you sit down, you get quiet and you check in, the answer is very often no. And then we go through to that question is, how do you react? What happens? How do you feel? What do you do when you believe the thought that patients should follow through with care? Well, we went through that beforehand. In this chiropractor's case, she felt frustrated, judgmental, disappointed in herself. She wasn't her best in leading them. She certainly wasn't a great coach. Because as coaches, we don't try and convince people. As leaders, we don't try and convince them. We lead them. We show them the possibility. We show them the opportunity. We look at people as adults. We see the best in them. And we open the opportunity and the possibility for them to see the bigness of chiropractic. Now, the end result of her showing up not that way is, people don't follow through with care. That's what we talked about, that self-fulfilling prophecy there too. So the fourth question here is, who would you be without the thought? Think about it for a moment. Who would you be without the thought that patients should follow through with care? Now, when I think about this immediately for me, and there's preparation for this episode now, I felt immediately lighter. I felt less stress. I felt less responsibility for other people's health. I find it difficult enough managing my own health. And when I felt like I needed to be managing everybody else's, that I needed to be responsible for them, that was a tremendous weight. When I said in the early days, when I was working with Russ, and he literally helped to take the leash off my neck, every time a patient didn't follow through with care, I felt like a failure. Every time a patient didn't follow through with care, not only did I feel like I'd failed chiropractic, but I felt like I'd failed them. It was incredibly heavy. Work wasn't always enjoyable. When a report of findings came up, I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And when I let go of the idea that people should follow through with care, then that weight lifted off me. It gave me the freedom to be able to connect with people, to not judge them, to be able to share with them the possibility, the potential of chiropractic care, and to give that to them without any expectations. Now, the interesting thing is when I showed up as this person, not only did my conversions increase, but my retention really increased too, because beforehand, when I was this judgmental kind of pushy sort of chiropractor there too, if somebody dropped out of care, there was no way they were coming back because I made them feel really bad for it. I made them feel stupid. I made them feel like they'd made a wrong decision. But when I let go of that idea and I then held on to the idea that these patients were going to be chiropractic patients for life, sometimes they were active and sometimes they were inactive, I opened up a much more empathetic and compassionate environment for my patients. And this was one where they very often reactivated themselves. They felt free to come back in when the timing was right for them. And all of my results improved. Now, there is a fifth, I've got to get my numbers right. There is a fifth part that after going through these 4 questions, Byron Katie will go through what she refers to as a turnaround. Now, in the turnaround, this can be also really valuable, to have you further embed in to get rid of the should. And the turnaround is when we ask ourselves, or we share the opposite of our original statement, and we ask ourselves the question, is this as true or more true than the original? So the original statement that I had with Lauren is that Lauren should have booked the accommodation. The turnaround could be is that Angus should have booked the accommodation. Is that just as true or more true than the original? Now, when I ask myself that question, then the answer is an enormous yes. I could have. I knew that Lauren was having some difficulties with it. She's also doing a beautiful job of managing Sunny. She's up during the night much more than I am, so she's not as awake and present as I am often. I can sometimes be picky about accommodation. Who would have thought, me being picky, hey? There's a lot that I could have and should have done to support Lauren in this. When we go back to this idea that patients should follow through with care, now the turnaround in here is that it could be, patients shouldn't follow through with care. Is that as true or more true? Well, the example I gave before with me with the dentist, I believe it's absolutely true that I shouldn't have followed through with care in that scenario. But sometimes when we're saying that somebody else should be doing something, we can also do the turnaround and ask ourselves the same question. I should be following through with care. It never ceases to amaze me how many chiropractors are not getting regularly adjusted, or if they are getting adjusted, it's in a very haphazard kind of way. They'll quickly jump in between patients with their associate. They don't have a regular schedule. They haven't had a set of x-rays and never get reviews. There's no real follow through with their care in the way that they would with their patients as well. Often it's just as true that you should be following through with care, not just your patients following through on care. So these 4 questions, I'll give them to you in a summary again. Is it true? Can I absolutely know it's true? That's the first 2. The answer to those questions is one word, yes or no. There's no story that goes along with it. Get quiet, be still and honest with yourself and see what comes up. The third question is, how do you react? What happens when you believe that thought? The fourth question is, who would you be without that thought? Now, these are really useful questions to ask yourself whenever you're finding shoulds, whenever you're arguing with reality, when things aren't going the way that you want them, when you're feeling frustrated, angry, overwhelmed. These are really, really useful. The same chiropractor that I was having the discussion with about her patients a week or 2 after woke up one morning and none of her front desk staff were able to come into the practice. Now, normally what would happen is that she would be saying things like, man, I should be able to have a staff. Things shouldn't happen this way. Why do these things always happen to me? These sorts of statements. And instead, she was able to let go of all of that. She was able to let go of the idea that it should be any different than what it was going to be today. Now, as a result of that, she literally floated her way throughout the day without there being any staff. She enjoyed the one-on-one connection that she had with her patients. Everything flowed freely and with ease. So they're the 4 questions, folks. If there are areas in your life that you're having difficulty with at the moment, then it might be worth asking those questions. Until next time, thanks for all that you do. Keep saving lives. Your community so desperately needs you to step up, learn this stuff and apply it too. See you soon. Bye. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching Program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspike.com/join. That's anguspike.com/join. I'd love to see you there.